Okay, everybody, welcome back to your crisis coach. I am Fredd Carroll. Scott Silverman isn't with us as of yet, but we have a guest today and we're on a schedule, so I don't want to leave my guest waiting too long. So today we got Joshua Shea. Do you prefer Josh or Joshua?
I answer to both. In
Yeah.
writing, I usually go with Joshua, but in real life, most people call me Josh.
So tell everybody exactly why you're here, what you do, and give them the bullet points.
Yeah, the bullet points are that I am a professional pornography addiction coach, certified. I'm also certified as a betrayal trauma coach and a therapeutic disclosure specialist. I've been doing this for about 3.5 years. I have been writing about pornography addiction and betrayal trauma for 6 years, currently working on my fifth book. And I myself was an addict. I'm coming up on 10 years sober of both porn and alcohol, quit them both at the same time in 2014. And I was a porn addict for 24 years, and I was also an alcoholic for 22 years. So I bring a personal experience to the table when I deal with my clients.
So when you say that, what I hear is there has to have been a catalyst event. What happened on that day that you had to quit both?
It was the day that I recognized that my gaslighting, that my way of life, that everything I had known up to that point was going to end either way. I could either take my addictions and I could go start a new life, or I could deal with all the people who were confronting me because I came to the epiphany they are done with me. I had recently lost my job of a company where I owned 1/3 of the company. I had been fired because of my drinking. They didn't really know about the porn. Um, but it was clear to me that I could either work on mending the relationships with my wife, my kids, my parents, the few friends who stuck with me, and I could see what recovery looked like, or I could continue to live the life that I was trying to live as an addict, but I was going to lose all of my personal connections. And I just had that epiphany that I need to get better. I probably, honestly, Fred, if I had continued the way I was going, I would not even give even odds that I'd be with you here with you today. I think that I would have been dead years ago.
Yeah, so explain to me because I'm not somebody that has a porn addiction. Obviously, I have seen it, I have watched it, I had all those typical growing up things.
Mm-hmm.
What what do you do? Is this trauma based, a lot of it?
It's, addiction is addiction is addiction. Most people end up in addiction because of trauma, the vast, vast majority. Um, Dr. Patrick Carnes, who's kind of the godfather of study in this area. He did a amazing, groundbreaking study years ago and found that something like 98% of men who end up as porn addicts, it's either because of sexual, physical, or mental slash emotional trauma. And I'm no different. Unfortunately, when I was a child, I had to deal with sexual abuse at the hands of a babysitter that I had for several years. And I also had to deal with mental abuse at the hands of my grandmother for several years. And I did not develop the proper coping techniques and the proper problem solving skills. When I was 12 years old, my cousin introduced me to pornography, and it was immediate. I did not develop an addiction. It was like a light switch for me. Here's pornography. Aha, I have found something special. I have found something that's going to help me go through life. 2 years later, when I was at a wedding, I tried alcohol and got drunk for the first time, figured out well, this is why everybody drinks. My God, this is amazing. And for the next 20 plus years after that, regardless of where I was in school, where I was professionally, where I was in my personal life, pornography and alcohol were my two vices. I knew that they could make a bad day okay, and they could make an okay day pretty darn good.
Yeah, it's so what you said does resonate with. I also was taken advantage of by a babysitter at a young age, and I didn't go that route, but my route, and I wrote about this in my book, my memoir that I recently released, that I turned it into, I used sex as a weapon in my future life, into my teenage years, into my 20s, where it was more of a numbers game I was
Mm-hmm.
playing. So I didn't go to the porn, but I went to the real, I
Yep.
guess is the thing. And I didn't, I was very excelled, is what the word I used, at technique and stuff like that, because I was taught at 8 years old these certain things. And so I could see how maybe if I had been introduced, unfortunately for me, I wasn't at a young age, maybe that would have become one of my gripes too. So then once you turn it around though, so where are you at your worst points? Tell me what a day as an addict is for a porno.
Uh, at my worst points in the year, 2 years in advance before I got in help, I was trying to run a company. It was a publishing company. We produced several magazines. I was the publisher. I was also editor of one of the magazines. Um, it was really and always chasing money, always hustling. Um, I was okay if I could take a few drinks during the day. What would happen is that I was somebody who was very good at playing characters and playing roles. I was very good as Josh, the publisher, Josh, the company owner. I also was a local politician. I was on my city council. I was also on several other boards. I helped create a film festival that was up here. I was on, like I said, I was on a couple of other boards. I was very good playing the part of Josh, the community guy, Josh, the guy that's busy and altruistic and helping people. The problem for me was, very late at night after the wife went to bed, after the kids went to bed, when I would pour myself a big glass of Red Bull and tequila, and I would sit there and realize that my company was just limping along, just going week to week. That was causing a huge amount of stress, and the toughest person for me to sit with, the toughest person for me to deal with was myself. And late at night, midnight, 1 a.m., 2 a.m., I'm was not much of a sleeper back then. Instead of dealing with who I was at the core, being able to sit by myself, that's when I got lost in the alcohol. That's when I got lost in the porn. I didn't have to face myself at that point. Porn was a true escape for me. And porn, I think, even more than alcohol, gave me a sense of control. Nobody on that screen ever says no to you. Nobody on that screen ever says you're not doing a good job, or you're late, or you weren't there, daddy, or you're not living up to your potential husband, or anything like that. You control everybody on the screen, and whatever you want to see these days, and even 10 years ago, you could easily find. So there was a real sense of control. And I think that I used that a lot in the last year or two as I could see my company starting to fail, as my body was just starting to fail and not keep up. I could see that ultimately I was on a roller coaster ride, and it was not going to end well.
Yeah. So Scott Silverman is joining us now. You hear me, Scott?
I do. I love coming in at the roller coaster ride. What a great timing for me, anyway. And I apologize. I have West Coast times down in my calendar, and Fred continues to confuse me by telling me I had 4 and 5 today. You're telling me it's 1 and 2. So I'm
Yeah.
here,
Well, it's
Joshua.
fun.
It's nice to meet you, and
Welcome.
I look forward to hearing the rest of the story.
So to catch you up, Scott, I could catch you up real quick. He was a porn addict and an alcoholic and quit both on the same day. And that's pretty much the backstory on that. And he's now an expert in porn recovery. And he's an author and writes several things. So I was just asking him a few questions, but I'll continue with, and you could jump in as needed. You're a smart man. You know how this goes, right, Scott? But
Yeah, before you go, and thanks for catching me up. A key question is when Fred shared that, Joshua, do you like Joshua or Josh
Either way.
or just expert? But when you say you're an expert, just curious, to a person who doesn't know you, quickly define for me what that means to you and how you got
Well,
there.
number one, I was an actual addict for 24 years. And in 2 days, as we tape this, in 2 days, will be 10 years sober. Um, and I am a certified pornography addiction coach. I'm a certified betrayal trauma coach. I am also certified as a therapeutic disclosure specialist. I have written 4 books about the subject. I'm currently working on my 5th. I have done a TED Talk. I've done over 500 of these types of interviews. And I read voraciously about this subject.
So you're not necessarily clinically an expert, but a plethora of not only lived experience, but documented lived experience and putting yourself out there, telling the story and getting feedback from people all over the place, whether it be clients or experts. Is that right?
Absolutely. Several years ago, when I decided to get into the helping side of things, I learned that here in Maine, there is no certified sex addiction therapist designation. So I decided not to go that route. And several of my friends who are therapists urged me to get into coaching and do telehealth, both because the pandemic had just started and because as a coach, I can coach anywhere telehealth. If I was a licensed therapist here in Maine, I would be stuck to just Maine clients, and I don't think that I would be solvent if I stuck to just Maine
No,
clients.
you're a brother from another mother. Been at it this since '84, and I don't have a credential. I don't even have the credentials you have to be a coach, but written books as well. So it's nice to hear that, because I think that people like yourself who have the lived experience tend to bring a level of connectivity with people. I don't know you, but I'm making some assumptions here. Um, they're able to connect with you because you can not only resonate with them, but they can resonate with you, and you've got a kindred connectivity that normally doesn't come from clinicians, because they're,
Right.
sorry, our time is up. It's kind of like, tell me more, or
Yeah.
okay, or
And I hear that from many of my clients is that they have, many of them have a general therapist, but they have me as a coach in this area because I do bring that lived experience.
yeah,
yeah,
no, that's great. And I run a treatment center, and I get the difference. And half our team are in recovery and half are not, and I like having that mix, because I think
Yeah,
it's important to have the clinical side, because people have some untreated trauma that might
absolutely.
need an initial level of triage. So I don't know. I'm just coming in late, supporting
yeah,
everything you're
that's
doing.
okay.
I hope
You
that
know
doesn't
you're
bother you.
Not at all. I can answer it, so it doesn't bother me.
That's right. But
Yeah.
with what we were talking about before, prior to Scott coming on, you had mentioned a wife and children. Were
Mhm.
you able to maintain those relationships?
Yes, I was because I didn't fight. When it finally push came to shove and it became time for me to decide that I was going to go get help, and I went and got help for the alcohol first. When it became time to do that, it was very clear that my wife was going to support me as long as I stayed with it. She didn't dictate how I had to recover, which I think is very important, but she was there to make sure that I was doing the work. She was there to make sure that I hit milestones. She was there to make sure that I improved as a human being. And when it came time a little bit later to start, I look at the going to rehab for alcoholism as like, entering an undergrad program. I started to understand addiction. I started to deal with my addiction. When I went to my rehab a little less than a year later for the porn addiction, even though I hadn't touched porn in 9 months, I went off to inpatient rehab. That was where I was able to focus on the trauma side of things. That's where I got to really understand. And I felt like that was almost like a graduate program because physically I was okay at that point and I was able to absorb so much more of the intellectual side of what was happening, and apply that to my life and understand that this is really about, how did I become this way? This is not why is Josh an alcoholic? This is what caused Josh to become an alcoholic, what caused Josh to become a porn addict. How did I become the man I was? My addiction was a symptom of a bigger problem. That was not the problem unto itself.
So is porn addiction similar to alcoholism? Is it passed down to? Is there a form of it?
Scientifically, there isn't a lot of study about that at this point, so I wouldn't want to say it is. Most of the science that I'm reading now seems to suggest more of a nurture versus nature. That's where people are leaning right now, but this stuff is all cyclical. If you grow up within a family, who knows whether it's the DNA or the fact that you're with them 18 hours a day. Um, I find for myself, I think that the alcoholism was definitely familial. And the more that I learn about my family, I can point to a lot of the issues around trauma, um, more familial, but we're just starting to talk about porn addiction. We there hasn't been multi-generational studies done at this point because the subject is still so taboo. Um, I am on social media regularly, and the amount of people who still believe that this is a joke and this is let's laugh. You're addicted to naked people doing naked things, and that's the addiction for me. My God, that sounds great. Well, we're still dealing with that, so there's not a ton of funding that's going into a lot of these studies that are happening yet.
Do you think? Go ahead, Scott.
I was going to say, and with the and I think everything I've experienced, everything you've said, and I've been in recovery for it'll be 40 years in November, and enough men's meetings and men's groups and adult children of alcoholics and Al-Anon and Sex Anonymous and Gamblers Anonymous and Debtors Anonymous. I mean, I'm afraid if I go to another anonymous program, I'll change my name to Anonymous. So I've studied it from the inside out. And because I got into the field of addiction treatment, and I defer to all the experts to do all the stuff. And I do the interventions and I do the family navigating. And then I let the, higher level of skills. But a good friend of mine is one of the best known psychiatrists, was just on the United Nations chair, traveled the world about studying addiction. And he told me that he goes, you're one of the brightest people I know when it comes to dealing with compulsive obsessive behavior and this the scourge of what happens with addiction in the family. So that was a real honor for me. And it's all experiential. My question though is, the point you made is so true, but when you look at industries that are making tens of billions of dollars from people that are participating in it, there has to be a compulsive, obsessive nature to it, because they couldn't make that kind of money. And that happens in the alcohol industry, happens in the drug industry, happens in the gambling industry. So when you think about it, when you look at some of the industries that the industries themselves that are making so much robust money off of other people spending theirs on an obsessive basis, there is some connection. And you're right about porn. There aren't a lot of studies because the stigma, the taboo, people don't talk about it. And everybody I see, I mean, we're licensed. We can't even technically treat somebody if their primary diagnosis isn't alcohol, but
Right.
we're licensed for both alcohol and mental health. And untreated trauma is a major contributor to mental health issues. So at the end of the day, I've never met anybody who has one ism, so to speak.
No.
We haven't even talked about food or mental health issues or anorexia or bulimia. And so there's so much of it out there. And what porn does is like gambling. It destroys families if it goes untreated.
Oh,
So
absolutely. And I think dovetailing off what you just said, one thing that is not being talked about enough right now that I've been trying to sound the whistle on is that I think that we are just starting to see the very beginning of a world where pornography addiction is not just about consuming, but it's about producing. Prior to the pandemic, there was not this robust industry out there of sites like OnlyFans where people would be making pornography. Now, on January 1st, 2020, basically right around the beginning of the pandemic, OnlyFans had about 300,000 people making content, many of them not pornography, because that's not why the site was initially created. It just came out the other day that there are now 3.2 million content creators on OnlyFans. So we've seen 3 million more porn stars join the ranks of the world, and that doesn't count all of the OnlyFans copycats. That doesn't count all of the cam websites that these people are going to. And when I wrote one of my books, which was called Porn in the Pandemic, and I looked at how the online pornography industry changed during the pandemic, I interviewed many of these young people, both men and women, who were going over and becoming models. And at first it was like, yes, I'm doing this for the money. This is all that I want. My retail job is gone. My restaurant job is gone. I'm now doing this. When I interviewed them several months later at the end of my book, at the end of the research period for my book, what I heard with many of them, especially the young ladies, was a very different story of, yeah, I'm doing okay money wise, but I can't get a date in real life. And suddenly I have men from around the world telling me how beautiful I am. I've got, wedding engagements. I've had people who, if I'm having a bad day, I can just, I can put a new picture of myself online. Suddenly I've got some money, but I've got people telling me how special I am. It's like, wow, that is a dopamine chase. That is an oxytocin chase. And I think that what we're going to learn over the next few years, as more and more of our young people continue to do this, is that pornography addiction isn't just consumer based, but there is a producer base to it because they're chasing much of the same stuff that the pornography consumers are chasing. It's the same coin, just another side of it. And people aren't looking at that yet either.
Yeah,
and with the money there, it never ends. It's like a drug cartel. It's like fentanyl. You've got the manufacturers that are competing to get it out there, and you've got the consumers who are dying to get it, so to speak. Okay, Fred, sorry, go ahead.
Well, what I was going to say was back to a few minutes ago when you were mentioning how people don't take it serious, porn addiction and stuff.
Right.
I was wondering, because first thing enters my head, and it might be me being small-minded, when you hear the word porn, for some reason, the word child porn, it becomes like it's against a child. We don't talk about adult drug abuse versus drug abuse is drug abuse, but porn addiction seems to be, when they're under 18, all of a sudden it's also against the law.
Right. Well, I think also we talk a lot about porn addiction because the biggest growing group of addicts are 12 to 18. The average child now sees pornography. The average boy now sees pornography at 10 years old for the first time. The average girl sees it at 11 years old. We've got boys who are completely addicted by the time that they're 14. And that's because, absolutely, Scott, we give each one of them the greatest porn computer that was ever created and say, go on your way, you're doing well. And, when we were all kids, the toughest part about porn was finding it. And now that we give these kids these phones, any kid who can type the words man, woman, and sex into a phone, which are probably what, second grade vocabulary words, they now have this entire world at their fingers. And that's what is scary because we are not teaching them what the dangers are the way that we teach about the dangers of drinking or the dangers of smoking or these things. And because, again, because of the taboo, I don't think we're going to, at least in public schools or anything anytime soon.
Do you see the connection with human trafficking? Because to me, porn seems like what marijuana used to be called as a gateway drug, meaning it stimulates that part of the mind, body, and soul. And then when you want to find a way, this is how an addict thinks, I think, you want more, and and because your immune system builds up, and you want to experience a higher dose of dopamine,
Yeah.
and the way you do it, I would think so. Human trafficking. I was on a gang panel years ago, when it was $32 billion. I think 15 years ago, $32 billion internationally, human trafficking. And I don't know what it is now, but I'm sure it's a minimum of double, if not more. And I would think the people that sit, in other countries, and I don't know, but you could see some of the crimes that go on in other countries around prostitution. So between prostitution and the idea of porn, and then tied with human trafficking, I'm sure they're interrelated to some degree.
Oh, absolutely. If you want to see human trafficking in the porn world, all you have to do is go to any of those cam sites and look at some of the Eastern European rooms. Look at some of the rooms from South America. Those 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 places have studios where they are forcing people to make pornography. Whether it's that they have to pay off their debts, pay off their family's debts, whatever the problem they got into it, they're not doing this because they want to. I'm not saying you do, but when people go on to these cam sites, I hope that they recognize this. When they go on to these porn sites that have 5 million videos, if you think everybody there wants to be there, if you think everybody there is consenting to be there, you're crazy. A few years back, Pornhub, I believe they had something like 120 million videos at the time. In order for them to continue to be able to process credit cards, they had to make a deal that unless they could confirm the ages or the consent of someone in a video, they would take it down. They ended up taking down something like 80% of their videos that they had at the moment because they couldn't confirm age, they couldn't confirm consent. Obviously, there was a ton of trafficking going on. I don't make trafficking my cause because I deal more with the addiction side of things, but it absolutely, the amount of people who are trying to get their hands on pornography, the demand is there to force people to make this stuff, to put them into indentured servitude to make this kind of stuff, because pornography is one of those things that everybody wants new material all the time. Once you use pornography once, it's done. You need the next new thing. You need the next new thing. That's why it's being spewed out at such a rate it is.
Yeah, this is a very interesting conversation because it's something like I had told you, Joshua, before Scott was here, that I'm completely unaware of, except from my children, obviously. my kids who are older now have been caught at these sites and stuff like that. I went through the typical teenage phases,
And
finding
that's
it.
completely normal. That's completely normal, completely understandable. As long as people have been able to draw on the walls of a cave, depictions of sexuality have been happening. That's not, necessarily what I worry about. I worry about the fact that 20 years ago, high speed internet started. 10 years ago, we got the smartphone. The technology is moving faster than the education. That's what the real problem is in today's world. We're
Yeah,
never going to get rid of pornography. I don't even tell people that I am anti pornography because that's like saying you're anti oxygen. You're not going to get rid of it. What we need to do is educate so people understand. All of those 17, 18, 19-year-old boys who suddenly can't get erections anymore because they've been using so much pornography for the last 5 years. Did anybody tell them about porn induced erectile dysfunction leading up to it? Because if not, where were they going to find out? How were they going to get this idea? Yet, if we could start telling 13, 14, 15-year-old boys about some of the health problems that come with pornography addiction or come with too much pornography use, maybe we would start addressing this problem.
yeah.
And talk
So
about relationship killer, to be able to not share that level of intimacy when you finally find that person that really, touches your heart and you want to spend your life with, and then you find out, what? No, we can't do that. We can't eat dinner at the dinner table. We have to eat on a small bench with a TV tray facing north because that's the only way I can consume my food.
yeah, it's unique because both of you are in the same situation that way. It seems like you both had the right partner in your life because Scott also, the wife stuck by his side through his, she was there when he was the addict and stuck by his side through his sobriety. And I'm sure with some of the same rules of you have to get this fixed. And it is unique though. It seemed I was kind of shocked when I asked you that question, and you did say, yes, I maintained those relationships. It's
And I
rare.
think those relationships were a big part of the foundation of what got me through. When people say to me, what's my first step to quitting? It's not, well, try this or do this exercise or breathe this way. It is find your must. Why must you quit? What is more important than anything else? And I had to recognize that my relationship with my wife, my relationship with my kids, keeping that was more important than any bottle I was ever going to find. It was more important than any naked body I was ever going to see on a screen. It was more important. And even, I know those were just my substances. It was more important than any good feeling that either of those things could give me, because ultimately the best feeling I got was being around them. They became my must on those days that were tough, on those days where I wasn't sure if I was going to relapse or not. I went back to my must. Why must I quit? Why must I stay away from this stuff? And I'm proud to say that coming up on my 10th anniversary, I have not relapsed because I put that must in place. That was my foundation for all my recovery, is that go back to the must.
So what did you I'm assuming obviously it's been 10 years. Those kids were much younger and now
Mm-hmm.
they're much older now. Are they adults now or are they teenage?
Yes, my daughter's 24, my son is 21 now.
What do they know about your past?
They know everything. They know I've written the books about it and do this publicly. They know everything, and I don't know specifically what their relationships are, if they watch pornography recreationally or if they stay away from it. I know that my daughter does drink alcohol. I don't believe my son does. But I let them know my story, and I made it age appropriate when I first went into recovery. They've learned more details since. I think they're proud of me for what I do. I think that, it's kind of funny. I have 10 times my daughter would love to be a influencer on TikTok, and her nearly 50-year-old father has 10 times the amount of followers of her because of what I do. So that's kind of fun. But I think they're proud of me. I think they recognize that their father had a lot of problems that they didn't know at the time, and they didn't know the roots of the problems, and they understand them now. And I think overall that probably makes them healthier people.
Yeah, it's a great thing. They should, I'm quite sure they are proud of you because I like I told you, this is new to me. The addiction world wasn't introduced to me fully in the form that I understand it now until Scott came into my life, because Scott introduced, once we got together, I spoke to the people. I got to speak with addicts and recovered addicts. But I see it in knowing Scott as my friend now. I could see how his children react to him. And I would guess, without speaking for Scott, I'm assuming his daughters are proud of him also, because you see it in every picture, that's taken. I've never doubted any of that. So what else, Scott, can we move from it? Well, one thing interesting I saw was during the research, you do mention how you believe blockers on the phones are lazy parents, quote
Yeah.
unquote, lazy parenting versus talking. You'd rather see them talk to their children than
Well,
just talk.
absolutely, because you can't stick your head in the ground and hope it's okay. I used to do a lot more public speaking than I do now, and there would always be, whether it was a church or a library, there'd always be a parent who was, we put blockers on our kids' phones so we don't have to worry about this. And it's like, congratulations, you've locked down one of the 7.8 billion smartphones in the world. You've almost taken care of this program by itself.
Yeah.
What happens when your 11-year-old gets on the bus, and while they can't get porn on their phone, what happens when little Johnny, whose parents don't do that, hold up the latest garbage from Pornhub and say, hey, look at this? What is your child going to say? What is your child going to do? Are they going to be curious? Are they going to be able to, go behind your back and look it up on the computer some other way? I think that, I'm sorry that this is the world we live in these days. My dad tells stories from the 1950s of having to hide under his desk during air raid drills. Well, thankfully, we didn't have to do that anymore. Times change, and we are living in a world where you need to make your child porn literate. And I'm not saying they have to become an expert, but I'm saying, when the child is young, you just say things like, nobody ever takes pictures of you without your clothes off, and you don't ever take pictures of people with their clothes off. And maybe as they start in school, hey, if one of your friends has their tablet or a phone and you see naked people on it, let me know or let a teacher know, because that's not what kids are supposed to see. I don't think that the porn speech is the birds and the bees speech. I think the porn speech is very similar to the not drinking in our house when you're a kid speech, not smoking cigarettes in our house when you're a kid speech. You can make your decisions on this when you're older, but it's not good for kids, and you should not be using this. And yes, there are always going to be kids who are curious. There are always going to be kids who disobey, but these conversations aren't even happening now. And I think that they can happen without being threatening, without being overtly sexual. They can happen in people's households, and they can make a big difference in their health when it comes to pornography as they develop.
Yeah.
And
Well, it's all,
kids are really smart today. You can go on and Google, how do I work around a blocked app? How do I work around parental guidance apps? It's not hard to do. I remember, and then of course there's the throwaway phones, which you can buy
Oh
at
yeah.
every corner store. And as you said, there's always, you take 5 kids, 5 families, probably 3 of them are not watching, which means the other 2 can jump in with the other 3 at any time, and they share it
Absolutely.
together.
And when
So
people
to
tell
your
me
point,
things like, "Well, thank goodness there's no porn on YouTube," Well, you don't know how to search YouTube if you don't know how to find porn on YouTube. That's the only thing that's there. If you want to get your hands on pornography, you're going to be able to get your hands on pornography if you have access to the internet. And you have to understand that your kids are not, being held in a bubble. They're around plenty of others who almost all of my clients, whether they are 18, 19, or 45, tell me that it was friends who introduced them to pornography. Or it was cousins, like it was in my case, that introduced them to pornography. It's peers who introduced you to pornography,
Yeah.
for the most part. And we have to accept that and recognize that's how we're going to deal with it.
So, Joshua, in closing, how do you want to promote yourself? Do you want people to buy your book? Where can people find you?
Well, you can find me online. I'm on both Instagram and TikTok as That Corn Coach. Have to be corn because, good Lord, can't say the P word. So it's That Corn Coach. I'm also at thatcorncoach.com. If anybody does have any questions, if anybody's looking for any kind of coaching, I deal with porn addiction. I also deal with betrayal trauma. That's what often happens when a partner discovers that their husband or wife or boyfriend or girlfriend has been using porn behind their back. You can contact me those ways, and keep a lookout for my new book, which will be about the 10 symptoms of pornography addiction that'll be coming out in late 2024.
That's excellent. That's excellent. You got anything in closing, Scott?
No, I want to say, I'm just looking you up now. It's I'm a little hearing diminished, so I had to hear you say it twice. That corn coach, I like it. I just thank you for being present with this conversation. I almost 95% of what you said resonated with me. The other 5% I just didn't hear clearly, so I have to go back and watch it again later. But that's just because I don't have my hearing aids in. But I think what you're doing is it's great. It's so important that we, and what I coach my parents and families on is, you need to shut up and listen to your children. They
Yeah.
will end up telling you, if they think that they can trust you and they believe that what they're about to tell you will be heard in a way that you won't be judged, which could be difficult because that's a risk for them. But if you make it easy, it's like, how do you like your meal I made? If they know you're looking for feedback, they'll give it to you. But if they think you're gonna, I do it sometimes. If I don't hear great from my wife, I get upset and go, well, why should I cook for dinner? You cook then. But you can't, so I have to be the one. But I just want to say thank you. I think what you're doing, Joshua, is great. It's real important. And to be honest, as you were sharing today, I was thinking, Fred, it might be nice to get his wife to hear the other side, how she felt about the experience of being, someone who, if she's comfortable doing something like that, my wife won't do it until we get over 500,000 viewers. So she'll do it, but she wants a minimum audience before she goes on and
Yeah, but even
embarrasses
if
me
not,
publicly.
it does sound like even if it's not his wife, you do know people who would be willing to come on and speak about from that angle. Yeah, because it sounds like you coached people in that realm of things. I'm sure there's people out there, many of them, who
Yep.
maybe, even if it's an audio only, it doesn't have to, nobody ever has to be on video on our show, and nobody has to be known. We don't need to know people's names or anything. So anyone you could send our way would be great.
Okay.
And we'd love to have you back on. We have this is your account. First of all, you're very good at this. You know how to tell the story. You're honest. And I don't even think we touched on 10% of what you could offer or stories that you have. Unfortunately, we're on a time schedule, of
Yeah.
course, but but that's how it is. But we appreciate you being on. This is your crisis coach with Scott H. Silverman. I'm Fredd Carroll, and that's Joshua Shea. If you want to reach out to Joshua, you could find him on TikTok and Instagram, and I will put the links in the show notes. And before we close out, what do we say, Scott? What is it? You
If
want me
no
to say
one,
it?
Yeah, I like when it's better when you do it because
When I say
we're
it,
trying to get you past that threshold of uncomfortability. Go ahead.
yeah, if nobody has told you they love you today, we love you, and we'll see you again next week. Thank you for joining us, and thank you, Joshua.
Thanks.